All right, well, it's after 7, so why don't we convene the meeting of the Housing Opportunities Committee. Welcome, everybody here, and want to get it moving along because we have a filled up meeting tonight. We're going to focus really on the comments from Glenn Chalder, who's the consultant that we'll be working on, and really the reports of the survey committee and the survey. For those of you that, that did attend the Zoom when they announced the survey, the other committees can report. Infrastructure, we have a short report and everything like that, and then we can discuss some of the other, review some of the other items on the agenda. I just have a few comments. I thought it was extremely beneficial. I forget who, Chris or who was it that put the Durham thing or on the link. I managed to watch that, and I thought it was extremely informative for a couple of reasons. Number one, the consultant in that case, I thought, did a great explanation of the plan and affordable housing, and the fact that we don't have goals. We're not trying to achieve any goals or anything like that. What we're really trying to do is making an appropriate assessment as to the housing needs of Woodbridge, the alternative housing needs. I have a tendency to use the other A phrase, which is alternative. When you have alternative housing, you have a road towards affordable housing, affordable with a small a, rather than the affordable with the deed restriction. As we go through the and get to the to Glenn and to the by the way, in case I don't know if all you saw the email, Mary Ann Dubuque, the attorney, cannot be with us tonight. Unfortunately, her father passed away, so she's on the agenda, but she wasn't able to be with us. Just a couple of points, and I'm not doing them out for discussion. But what impacted me when I watched that Durham thing? And there were two things that impacted me. One of which I don't think we have to worry about. The other one we do have to worry about. It impacts the survey. The one that I think we don't have to worry about is, I was not surprised to hear the Planning and Zoning chairman take affront at the fact that there was a housing committee and Planning and Zoning wasn't involved in it. And I don't think we're dealing with that in Woodbridge. We don't have to worry about it. At some point, there has to be an interconnection, an interrelationship between our committee and them, because we're not writing regulations. We're making suggestions for a plan. Second of all, unfortunately, what you heard from that young couple is out there in all communities. And being familiar with the area that they're talking about, it was a situation where people have this impression that when you're talking about affordable housing, you're talking about things that are negative. They were referring to crime and all this other stuff. Now, if someone, and there's no purpose when you have that to say to those people, can you give me some proof of what you're talking about? But they can't. There are problems in any area, and there are problems in the area that they're talking about, but they're not related to affordable housing. But it was just something that stuck with me, that as we go through it, as we try to get answers, we have to realize that there are people out there that there are in Woodbridge that have those thoughts about it. So with that, I want to move this along and introduce Glenn Chalder, who's a planner, who consulted with the Planning and Zoning Commission on the entire open communities application, and is our consultant for the purpose of this Housing Opportunities Committee, Study Committee. Glenn, it's all yours.
Well, thank you. I guess I have to start off. I'm not sure I'm your consultant for the work of this committee. I've done work with Mary Ann on and with the Planning and Zoning Commission on the Open Communities Alliance application. I have experience working with communities on preparing affordable housing plans. Mary Ann indicated she would be here tonight, and would I join her to add information on my experience? And I said I'd be delighted to. So I'm here, and Mary Ann she hasn't ditched me for the evening. She's got a significant family event going on or whatever. So I don't have any prepared remarks tonight. I thought I would follow and hopefully answer questions that you might have, talk about what other communities are doing or issues that I have seen or ways to help you in your charge. Chris shared your charge with me, so I have a chance to, I've seen that. I understand the work before you. If I can be of any use or value to you to help you in your efforts, that's why I'm here. Any questions, thoughts?
Well, if you could give us a little background on some of the plans that you've done and how
Yep.
they have evolved, and what are some of the issues that those towns confronted or were involved in, I think that might be helpful.
Certainly, thank you. As you're probably aware, the state legislature passed a public act in 2017, which required that communities prepare these affordable housing plans. The statutes require that the plan can't be older than 5 years. So every community in Connecticut assumed that 2017 plus 5 years meant 2022. And I think the state didn't anticipate the communities would do that, but that's what they did. And so now we're down to less than 12 months to the 2022 deadline, and there's 169 municipalities in the state, and some of them are done, and some of them haven't even started yet, but there's a number that are in process. My experience, I've had a chance to work with adopted plans in Newington and Stratford, both of which are much bigger than Woodbridge and have infrastructure and other situations, but even those communities, I guess they could be more different, but every community has their own unique circumstances and situations. I think I heard the chairman talking before the meeting started about infrastructure, and Newington, completely water and sewer. Stratford, no, not so much. But issues related to transportation, trains, transit, all those types of issues are different. I also have an opportunity to work in some other communities around the state, from large to small, so I'm in the process of working on plans with Suffield, which is a more rural community, perhaps more like Woodbridge in some respects. They do have water and sewer. They've made some progress and recently achieved a 4-year moratorium under 830J through some of their efforts. And working in Fairfield, I worked with Fairfield on preparation of their 2014 affordable housing plan. So before the state even had a requirement, they had originally adopted a plan back in 1988. They felt it was time. They have an affordable housing committee. They felt it was time to update their plan, and before the statutory requirement, they had done that. So I'm working with them to update their plan today. And then other communities around the state as well, Westbrook, coastal community over by Old Saybrook, and a couple other communities as well. Really very diverse situations. We are following, in many respects, the elements of the State Department of Housing Guidebook. I'm sure you've seen it, the blue-covered Housing Affordability in Connecticut. Have you? Okay, I was going to say I haven't brought a copy with me. So we have undertaken an analysis of census and other data to see where are the issues and opportunities, where do we have gaps in our housing supply. We have done community surveys in each of the communities to try to get a sense of what the issues are that the people identify in their community. We've looked at the plan of conservation and development. We looked at the zoning regulations to identify impediments or opportunities in those regulations, and then moved towards strategies in terms of how the community could address really two things. And those two things are really sort of this. The statute says, I think it's 7 words. The charge under 830J the Connecticut General Statutes, is increase the number of affordable housing developments. So those 7 words is really the charge. But under the statutes, affordable housing developments is 2 types of housing. It is assisted housing, which is housing which receives government funding in some way, shape, or form. And in Woodbridge, I think you have 30 units of assisted housing, and it is the elderly housing. What's the name of the street again, Chris? Yep. So you have 30 units of assisted housing. The other category that falls under the affordable housing development definition is deed-restricted units. So these are units which have been created through a variety of methods, but are deed-restricted to sell or rent at affordable prices. And those are the other flavor, if you will. So that's the minimum aspect of what 830J requires. And I think a number of communities are building on what the chairman indicated, which is alternative housing opportunities. How can we look at our overall housing supply? And with changing demographics and people working out of their houses, people, again, aging, and perhaps they want to have their parents live with them or even their kids after college. There's a lot of different sort of changing housing dynamics. And so a number of communities are looking at not just what the state statute is mandated, but how can we look at opportunities to diversify our housing supply so that it meets people's needs, that Woodbridge could be a community for all people for all stages of their lives, as opposed to perhaps, having one flavor. One community, somebody on the committee I was working with joked that Baskin-Robbins has 31 flavors. Why can't our housing supply have more? And so I think those are really kind of the issues that communities are grappling with. And grappling is probably the right word, because this level of attention and focus has not really been part of preparation of plans of conservation and development and other things over the years. It has been, POCDs have tended to be aspirational comments, but haven't always gotten through to regulation suggestions and other things like that that really can make a difference for a community in terms of moving forward. I think the other thing to say about 830J is that the statute requires that once the community has prepared this plan, that it has to be updated every 5 years. Normally, the community has a plan of conservation and development, which is, your plan is 2015? 2015. So that plan is on a 10-year refresh cycle. So I think probably what's likely to happen over time is that the 2 documents will start to work in parallel with each other. The housing plan will be updated every 5 years, and then once the census data comes out and is newer and fresher, that the POCD might be updated in parallel with that along the way.
Anybody have any questions for them going forward? What our charge is and how we can use more help? I mean, one thing that I haven't, and I know we're going to be talking about surveys, but you talk about community surveys. I mean, you'll hear from our survey committee, subcommittee who's done a great job. Most of us, a lot of us attended the, what do you call it, unveiling of the SCROG survey. And I'll be honest with you, I am, and I'm speaking for myself, not for the other, I'm a little disappointed in the survey, more than a little disappointed. And I understand it's a regional approach. But in some of the surveys that you were part of, were they able to be tailored to the community?
Yes and yes, but no, I guess is the best way to describe it. When we're dealing with housing, there really aren't a tremendous number of questions that we can ask people about sort of their housing needs themselves personally, but also the circumstances or situations revolving around their community. So the issue is the survey focuses in on sort of those aspects. I was on that call, mostly because I'll be working with the town of Brantford on their affordable housing plan. I worked with them on their plan of conservation and development. But they didn't actually dive deep into the SCROG report or proposal And they're one of the communities, I think there's 15 communities in the region and 13, or there's 2 communities in the region that are not participating, and Brantford's one of them. So we're going to be doing our own survey in Brantford. But that was kind of factored in beforehand. We knew that. We thought we might want to dabble our toes into participating in the SCROG approach, but I think there were 2 reasons why Brantford is probably going to go its own way. Number one is they think the timing might be a little off, in the sense that the SCROG study has a gap between October and December where there's really nothing happening in their schedule, and then they're working along, but the actual report with strategies doesn't really come out till April, May, and it needs to be adopted by June 1, and the statutes require a 30-day notice period. So they have said to us, as part of our work, you do the survey, you do the research and analysis, and we're going to have strategies ready probably by the end of the calendar year, so that we now have 6 months or 5 months to review them before we get to adoption. So I would urge you, as part of your work and efforts, to kind of pay attention to the calendar, because there's a 30-day notice requirement on the hearing. The statutory deadline is June 1. It was considered to be June 22, but the recent public act passed by the legislature changed the effective date of these to be June 1 of 2022. So there are some mechanics along with that. Now you may ask yourself, what's the danger if we don't make that date? And they haven't really identified specific penalties or thresholds. In the case of a plan of conservation and development, if you don't make your 10-year deadline, the state can withhold discretionary grants. And that can be grants not like the formula grants for education, cost sharing, and things like that, but it could be grants for sewer, water, open space, senior center renovations, a lot of different types of things. We're not quite at that level yet with regard to the housing plans, but as part of the Public Act passed this year, the legislature established a special committee, and that special committee is supposed to be looking at ways to promote implementation or enforcement or something related to these housing plans. So we've started a journey here in Connecticut in terms of the preparation of these documents, and we'll see how it unfolds over the next 5 years or so.
And maybe on this timing issue, I mean, one of the things, if you were on the thing, I brought it up, you brought it up, we brought it up in our comments, that the timing of the survey is very poor. I mean, one of the things I learned is you never do anything in August, because
You're not going to do it in August, no, it's coming out in September.
Okay, so they listen to that, they're pushing it out, you know, to September, but run this by me again about this gap in there.
Well, as I looked at the schedule of what they had prepared, the gap, the slide that they had, was like the 5th or 6th slide in their set, talked about the different work elements that were going to be occurring. The survey was going to get started. The survey was going to wrap up. I think they had originally said like September 7th or something like that.
No, it's October.
But because of some of the concern from some of the member communities, they've decided to accept comments, which is going to delay and push off the survey. But they talk about doing their data analysis and collection and other stuff through the end of October. And then the next set of deliverables doesn't start till January or February. And I think the hardest thing for any planning project, and I guess that's kind of what I do with and for municipalities, data collection is not the most important part of the process, but it's often where a lot of the time gets devoted. The most important part of the affordable housing plan is going to end up being the strategies that you have been asked to, your charge asks you to come up with strategies that will help diversify Woodbridge's housing portfolio or address alternative housing needs in the community. So data collection is important, but it's not the most important. And so Brantford's felt that the strategy parts of the conversation weren't going to happen until March. And that was just too late in the game, they felt. And so we're going to be moving the strategy portion of the scope of work up, to give ample time for that discussion, to get community input, not on how do you feel about housing, but how do you feel about this strategy? Or how do you feel about
Right.
this area or location? So we're gonna do a Survey Monkey survey in the fall for kind of qualitative, general stuff. It's not gonna be too different really than what SCROG's doing. Some of the questions aren't particularly useful to what we're doing, but I can see why they would be on the SCROG regional basis. But I think the community review and input as the strategies come together is something that they think is particularly important.
A couple of questions again, to return to your experience with other towns. You've taken a look at our charge. My preference would have been for a charge that actually spoke to the community and explained to the community what it was that we were supposed to be doing. So I wonder if I'm right in being concerned about that, if other communities have charges that do that, or are they all just sort of like ours?
Well, most other communities don't have a charge specifically as you do. If they did, I think it would be similar to yours. The charge to other communities is prepare the affordable housing plan as required by Connecticut General Statute 830J.
That would be better.
So,
Second question.
but I think that's
Oh,
buried in your charge. At least I felt it was.
I was a little, well, I have my concern. I also wanted to ask you about working with, or with groups similar to ours. Have you had experience in the other towns where you worked on the plans? Because in the SCROG meeting, as best as I could tell, because we didn't have a list of who was on it and who's in charge in the different communities, I'd love to see such a thing. But it was apparent that some others did have housing committees or groups of individuals, and some others were just working with the planner or the planning department. So do you have any tips for us as a housing committee that's trying to contribute to this process?
So I think the hard part is this committee didn't exist before February, is that correct?
That's right. Not
So-
really before May, actually.
I've been a planner for, I guess, over 40 years at this point in time, doing mostly work with and for municipalities. One of the things I've sort of learned over the years that commissions end up having DNA, I call it, which is they have operating structures that Dominic, I believe, correct, is the first chairman. So whoever's the next chairman is going to learn from this experience, and people who come on the board will learn from that. So some towns have had, like Fairfield has had an affordable housing committee since the late 80s. And their
Fairfield.
work effort has ebbed and flowed over the years depending on the level of attention that the council, the Board of Selectmen, council, and the representative town meeting sort of paid to them over the years. But with 830G, somebody in Fairfield made the comment to me that they feel that they have the most 830G applications of any community in the state that were filed there. That doesn't necessarily mean the most units, but they have, for example, a situation that a 1 acre zone, and somebody filed an 830G application on a 1 acre lot to put 3 units. And one of the units would be affordable and the other 2 would be market. And so they've had a number of those. So you may not look at the number of units created, but the number of applications filed, and there have been quite a few. So that's a situation where you have a group that's been around and has some DNA. In other communities, because it is often considered to be somewhat of a land use issue, the other boards and commissions have been invited to participate in a working group or a subcommittee. So they have some basis of experience working with local boards as part of their work. So everybody's kind of feeling their way on this. Because my work is as a consultant, I don't know of towns that are doing it just with staff, but I imagine, well, no, actually that's not true. I live in Simsbury, and Simsbury, I believe that it was staffing with the commission. And theirs is a very short plan. You might want to look at that one. They recognize that The state goal or threshold is for each community to have at least 10% of its housing stock meeting the criteria of affordable housing. And Simsbury recognizes they're not going to get there in 5 years, but their goal is to increase their affordable housing percentage 1% over the next 5 years. And they think that they can definitely do that. And that's their goal, and that's a fairly short plan that sort of describes that. So you shouldn't think that you have to write a thesis. I think Stratford's plan is 24 pages, and it has a 4-page executive summary. So there are ways to try to get your point across. And I think as more plans get completed, you can see what other towns are doing and cherry pick and say, you know what, that's a perfect strategy for Woodbridge. We could really work with that. And then, once the plan is adopted, focus on implementation.
Yeah, go ahead.
Glenn, I got a question for you. What have some other towns used for creative ideas for affordable housing that are also serviced mostly by well and septic? Come up, for example, like cluster housing. What are some other creative ideas that they've used, with the limitations of, well and septic and watershed?
I think that they have worked with those. Salisbury has had a fairly active affordable housing committee for some time. They don't have sewer system, so that they have dealt with soil limitations, and they've looked at ways to try to create housing which mimics the character of their community. I worked with them on a couple of public outreach exercises, and they've gotten strong support in the community for moving ahead and seeking grants. And they have, I think, a nonprofit housing organization that works to build housing. So there's no, perfect project. There's not like a Chevrolet or a
Right.
Buick or something else like that you would just take around. Housing tends to be, tailored, if you will, to the circumstances, the community, the anticipated residents. Elderly housing would be different than family housing, and
Right.
so that's part of the first thing, is kind of figuring out what the needs are in the community.
Gotcha.
And then how can we approach it? I think when, as part of the work on the OCA application, we looked at the town's elderly housing project and the number of units per acre. And anybody have any sense of how dense that is, or not dense, or?
I know the answers on that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you be quiet. Yeah.
Is it 30 something?
It's pretty dense, I would
It's
say.
30 units.
Yeah, 30 units on 1 acre, a couple acres at most, 2 acres. Yeah,
So
15, yeah.
so we use that as a reference point as part of our work in thinking about the OCA application, because 15 units per acre sounds like a lot in some communities, but in other communities it's really not. But that seemed to fit on that particular site, and the only thing that I noticed was that because it's an elderly housing development, the parking area is really about 1 space per unit, and normally you would require 2 spaces per unit. So the very pretty courtyard that the houses sit around wouldn't, in a lot of other developments, that would end up being parking, which would change the whole character of that particular development. But you might have a good model right here in Woodbridge that you could look at and say, there are features of this or elements of this in size and scale and design that if we could do more like this, that might be a good approach for Woodbridge to take or to look at as its possible applicability. And the well and septic limitations are going to dictate much of what can happen. But within those confines or constraints, what could fit into the overall character of the community? And look at that.
I mean, from an infrastructure perspective, what Glenn mentioned about Fairfield, about 3 houses on 1 acre, you know what I mean? I mean, a fourplex on a 2 acre is, in today's day and age, again, depending on your soil situations, is an easy septic system, relatively easy septic system, depending on what soil conditions you have, something like that, because, again, and I know this gets back to the issue, you have very large one-family homes with multiple bedrooms and multiple things that rest on them that have to have up-to-date septic systems. So, you know, that is something that one of the things you get from people when they say to you, if you pass affordable housing, you're gonna destroy our water and wells. Of course not, because that doesn't, the 8-30G, none of the zoning laws impact health laws. You know, in other words, you still have to comply with the requirements of the health district. They don't overrule those in any fashion. They don't change the burden. So, you know, there are situations, and, you know, interesting that, you know, you mentioned about somebody doing a triplex with one affordable unit and two, you know, two other units. It's, you know, it's something that physically could occur. The question, then you get to the issue of character and that nature, but.
So I only use the Fairfield example because Fairfield has public water and public sewer,
Right,
which
yeah.
is the only thing that made that.
But I mean, and that was on 1 acre, but if you took a threeplex unit, if you took 3 units, you put them on 2 acre, I mean, I know, because, you know, I've been involved in projects where they design, you know, designing septics, and right now, we're doing one families with 4-bedroom colonials on 20,000 square feet. You know what I mean? And so you go down to 2-bedroom townhouses. You know what I mean? And that's what you're going. You're going by bedrooms and bathrooms. That's what you're doing when you're talking to whether it's Quinnipiac Health District or,
Just bedrooms, no bathroom.
huh?
Just
Well, that's right,
bedrooms.
just, yeah, normally bedrooms, but how many bedrooms do you have? So if you have 8 bedrooms and a 4-plex, or 6 bedrooms and a 3-plex, that's what they're looking at. Can you have that? But I mean, that's the structural end of it, you know, the infrastructure end of it as to what you can or cannot do. And, yeah, any other questions for Glenn before we move on to survey?
One question, Glenn, just going back to the surveys, you said you worked in the town of Westbrook?
Working there now, yeah.
Okay, because I'm part of the survey committee, and that was probably one of our most favorite surveys, because we really thought that got into the life cycle of a resident. It kind of talks about, like, where did you live before, where do you live now, what are you thinking about living in the future? And it just kind of was, you know, you really got an understanding of the resident perspective as opposed to, you know, the COG survey, which was kind of questioning. To me, it was like testing a resident's knowledge of the housing market. And I was like, well, why do we need to ask residents? We could just ask our local realtors. But I guess there was a whole, like, I think, strategy behind doing that, but it wasn't apparent to me. So I guess my question is, how was that Westbrook survey created? Was that something?
I worked with them to create this survey. The question that was asked, that you described, is 3 questions in a row. It provides a list of different housing types, and it says, which of the following housing types have you lived in the past? What do you live in today?
Right.
And then what might you live in the future? And that sequence of questions in the survey actually grew out of the work we did on the 2014 Fairfield Housing Plan. We actually did it, though, with big paper sheets on the wall and colored dots. And people put, I think it was a green dot for where they had lived in the past, a blue dot for where they live today, and then a yellow dot for where they would live in the future. And the interesting thing is that it influenced people's thinking about the types of housing that they had lived in.
Right.
So sometimes people feel that if housing's different than the housing that they live in today, and I'm not sure what the couple mentioned at the meeting in Durham, but they are concerned it's a threat to their property value in some way, shape, or form because it's different. And what we found by asking the survey question is that people said, well, I'm a good person. I've lived in a 2-family house. I was born in a or I've lived here, or I've lived in some situations, and I'm a good person. That was a good housing choice. Could we have that in our community? So the question was asked in a way to get people thinking flexibly rather than just cocooning and saying, oh no, we only have one flavor in our town. And the issue is, what about your kids? What about your parents? What about other choices? So that question, we find, helps people open up a little bit and be a little bit more receptive. The survey is completed in Westbrook. The results of the meeting is actually tomorrow night. So I think the report may be online. So if you want to go see what the results were.
Can you tell me what the response rate was?
Didn't do great in Westbrook. I mean, I wouldn't call it a response rate. Because the challenge we have, in the old days, listen to me, right, 2 years ago, right, before COVID, our whole purpose was try to get people to public meetings to actually have a dialogue. And I think this is actually one of the valuable things about the SCROG work. David Fink is very accomplished. He's an excellent facilitator of meetings. He's worked on housing issues for quite some time. He can help people address the questions or concerns they have, and he has the facts at his fingertips in terms of addressing those issues. So Branford is going to take advantage of that opportunity with SCROG to do that, and I would urge you to do the same thing. I think it can be very helpful and informative. And if you can get him earlier, rather than, he's got to do 15 or 17 towns,
Yeah.
right? So I think if you can get early in line, I would urge you to try to do that.
He owes me, so, you know,
Well,
we'll work on that.
I already talked to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we used to do these in-person meetings as a way to get people talking and listening to each other. When you do an online interaction, it tends to be one way. And you don't really have a chance for people to hear other people well. They don't hear them as well as they do when they're in the same room, and they can see the person and interact and react and see how the crowd reacts to what people have to say. When you do an online meeting, it's kind of flat. So we ended up doing these online surveys with SurveyMonkey and trying to replicate some of the things that we have found to be effective in public meetings. And it's still a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of what happens.
Well, can I ask you what your opinion is of the SCROG survey? I mean, I understand they're trying to do that on a regional basis, and it has to be done with a regional lens, but we just really like the Westbrook survey so much because of just exactly the way the questions were asked, and it really, you know, for us, gave us a picture of the information we really needed to discern from the residents.
Well, I mean, it's nice that they're doing a survey as part of the region. I mean, you could, having been in a consultant's shoes before, I'm not sure whether or not they're going to want to get too far afield in terms of adding all of the questions in, because the survey could mushroom and bloom. And I think what we try to do is design a survey in SurveyMonkey so it's like no more than 7 to 8 minutes. So you got to keep people in. We had over 1,100 responses, I think, in Fairfield. I think in Westbrook it was 160 maybe, something like that. Over 500 in Suffield, which is not a large community. What's the population of Woodbridge?
A little under 9,000.
Okay, so Suffield is bigger than Woodbridge. So I think the question really is on any survey is how you get the word out. And you may have more success with a Woodbridge survey. With SurveyMonkey, it's not that hard to do. You just have to get it to go viral or get it out there. SurveyMonkey will tabulate the results itself. So you don't have to read several hundred surveys, et cetera. You can have it tabulate the closed-ended questions, and then the open-ended are a little bit harder to characterize. So I don't necessarily I don't want you to go rogue, because I think that the value in the SCROG survey could be the fact that other communities are also participating. But I think the surveys that we've done, I mean, we did 3 surveys in June and July, and the participation rate was good. And we did our checks, if you will, on demographics and some other things, and there's some variability based on who responds. But I would say the biggest difference is whether or not you can get it to go viral with social media or email blasts or however else you can get people to participate. You may have more success with a locally based survey than a regionally based.
In your opinion, what is a good response rate?
See, I don't ever look at it in terms of the rate. When we sometimes do work on plans of conservation and development, we have used telephone surveys. And on a telephone survey, randomly selected households, you're reaching out now to people, not waiting for them to respond to yours. 400, a sample size of 400 households will give you a margin of error plus or minus about 3.5%. And that's what you have to be concerned about, is whether or not the margin of error, you get a survey response. I was dealing with a survey recently, and the response to a particular question was 40 in favor, 20 didn't know, and 40 were opposed. You know, doesn't help you much. It doesn't really give you a clear direction as to which way to go. But even if it was 50, 10, 40, margin of error around those responses are big enough that that's kind of an indication, but it's not certainty. So I never think about the rate, because unless you're going to reach out to the community and nail households and say you have to respond either by phone or otherwise, a rate isn't important. The sample size you end up with is. And so I think you may have somebody in town who's more versed in statistics than I am, but I think the issue is not the percent participation, it's the number of responses. And if you can try to avoid bias in the results, I think those would be performance things that I would be concerned about.
Jim, you had a question?
Yeah, a couple. I don't know how you get a statistically significant response. I just don't know. I'm calling people these days, nobody picks up the phone anymore. I mean, really.
Well, I've had good success with that in the past, because the survey methodology that we have used says, for example, you look at it, usually it would say something like Woodbridge Survey, right? The caller ID says Woodbridge Survey. You say, I'm watching a show or something, I don't want to pick this up. The message gets left. It says, listen, we've got your household, we've got your number, we're going to try you 3 times. If we don't get you, we're going to move on to another household in town.
Okay. So
And
that's
if you'd
what
like to
you try
schedule a time, please call us back at the following number. And we've
Okay.
had great success with that. So
Okay.
if you use a survey mill, if you will, that just cares about getting through, then yeah, maybe people don't. But if you do it because you care, people
Yeah.
will.
But out of idle curiosity, if you were asked, answer my colleague's question, you would say that it was what? I mean, you threw out, you threw out the fishing line to 100 people, and how many people responded? I know you don't care about that, but I'm just curious to see whether, it'd be nice to know if we're, if we do that and we get, we come a crapper or not.
Yeah, if
Or
Chris
maybe you
said-
don't know.
If Chris sends me an email, I'll go back through some surveys that we have done and give you the population, the number of surveys we got, and I'll tell you the percentage.
Just so we can sort of gauge what we end up doing. I actually have a more substantive question. One of the things, we're, I think we're supposed to be looking at what the demand is for housing, and there's a shortage, which suggests that, there's the greater demand than supply. I guess the question I have is, if we only ask the people who live here about how, what their views of housing and availability and stuff, how are we capturing the folks that maybe work here that want to live here? Well, we're not going to talk to them. Or the people that are in another neighboring community that want to live. I mean, when I was listening to the housing, I listened to the the Wednesdays thing afterward, and somebody was talking about how to measure demand, and it kind of lost me, because it was sort of a lot of there was a lot of throwing darts at a board, it seemed to me. But I don't know how do we begin to capture that
I think
concept?
there are sources of information out there that you could explore. There is, OCA did
Okay.
do an analysis of fair share, and the concept of fair share is based on, work in New Jersey years ago. I'm also not sure about that math in terms of the way that that's computed, but you can get a sense of what they have and how they have estimated the demand at different price levels. There's also something, the CHAS, Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy. I think CHFA puts this out, and it looks at housing demand and supply, and it might provide information statewide. One of the things that I learned from, gosh, it might have been RKG actually, but the concept of displacement, which is that you can have people who earn enough money that they could afford a lot of different housing, but they actually occupy a less expensive unit because it's, you know, they can afford it and it's, you know, meets their needs. But actually, they're displacing somebody who really needs that unit. That they're stretching to get to that unit, but somebody who makes more money occupies it. And the concept of displacement is, you know, builders tend to build where they can make the most money.
Well, yeah.
So somebody, the analogy they used was like a milk bottle. And so the builders are building for the cream at the top of the bottle. But who's building or who's creating needs on that spectrum? And therein lies part of the challenge, is that for different levels of affordability, the market's not going to do it unless we create incentives or provide opportunities or funding or tax relief or other things like that. And I think that's part of the state's initiative for increase the number of affordable housing developments, those 7 words. I think that's kind of the impetus behind all of this, is that we're not going to have enough. How can we create more? And 169 towns are going to look at that and see what comes back.
Thank you.
And not have 3 words added to those 7s in another town.
No, I just had a question. Going back to the survey, and Donovan, correct me if I'm wrong, we did an EDC survey not too long ago, and maybe a show of hands if anyone participated in it, and it was about what people would like to see business-wise in town, and how do they frequent restaurants and shops, et cetera. So it was not on SurveyMonkey, but another platform. I don't recall the name of the platform. I had never heard of it before. And it was promoted just via a few Facebook posts and the town e-newsletter. And we ended up with almost 400 responses.
Good for
just
you.
for an EDC survey that was pretty much, Betsy Yagla found other surveys from other towns that we, in a couple of meetings, customized to our needs, went out via this platform, which was significantly cheaper than SurveyMonkey. I remember that it was very inexpensive. It might have been $100 or $200 to do the survey. Tabulated the results for us, and I think we had a pretty good response for something that wasn't promoted in a big, flashing light, extravagant way. So there are ways to customize
I
that
think
may
you should
not.
I mean, that's interesting, because if I had gotten it, I would have answered it. But I don't recall being on the,
Yeah, it was about restaurants and shops and what would you like to see in town. Of course, bagel shop, coffee shop, those kinds of things were very popular responses, but,
Facebook, I think.
I mean, I tend to post things on those, Woodbridge resident Facebook groups and things. And I don't know if the surveys you're doing, one question we had was, is it protected in a way where someone could only reply once? In our case, it wasn't a big concern, but I don't know if in a housing study, that would be a concern in what you found with other towns. Because if 4 members, 5 members, 6 members of the same family kind of boilerplate all their same answers, and then there's a whole other kind of segment of the community population that doesn't respond, you have higher responses, but they're all kind of.
Yep. So first of all, you should be very proud of the 400 responses, because I think that's good in terms of.
For something low key like that, and we were lucky too. We had a data analyst on our committee, so he did wonderful pie graphs and charts and things like that. Yeah.
Part of the problem is the time window that you have. People think if you keep the window open longer, that gives more people a chance to participate. And the issue is, if there's no sense of urgency, people kick it down the road and don't always get to it. So I think I would be pleased with, Fairfield's 60,000 people, right? So it's 6 times the size of Woodbridge, and they had 1,000.
Wow. That's.
So,
Yeah, that's
again, I think
surprising.
you should be proud. Because the issue is, I don't think you should hyper-focus in on the percentages and responses.
Agreed. For me, it was more about the variety, and if I really in this case, if I really wanted to see, a sushi restaurant, could I reply to this survey, open-ended, 100 times, because it's so easy on my
So-
phone?
Yeah, so I don't know what survey platform you did use, but SurveyMonkey has a feature that you can export all the results to an Excel spreadsheet. One of the columns in the Excel spreadsheet is the IP address.
Oh, so you could see if there's a lot of.
You can sort
groups.
by IP address, and I have found some IP addresses with multiple responses. But by looking at the responses, for example, gender, you can see it's a husband and wife,
Right,
or it's their kid.
right.
So the issue is, somebody really wanted to kind of, stuff the survey box. Actually, we did have a funny situation in Fairfield where we found 20 from the same address. And it turned out to be, we had left it open. We didn't limit the number of responses from anything. But we had told the housing authority about the survey, and they got many of their residents involved, and they had a computer in the community room.
Oh,
And they
true,
used that.
right, right. It would be like if someone's using our public library or something.
So we
like that,
didn't,
Right,
you can, and I have set up surveys before to say, no, sorry, somebody already took the survey from this device, you can't do it again. And we wanted to try to promote participation. But if you look at the results and go through them and say, okay, look, clearly, there's 5 responses from one IP address, somebody's trying to stuff that all the responses are the same or worded slightly differently, but it's across the board, delete 4 of them and go with the rest. Because, again, the purpose here is not surgical precision of tenths of a percentage point. The question should be, do we have 60-40 on our percent
Right.
of
and were these surveys promoted with any kind of a mailing to someone's household? Or it was really just a digital survey promoted in a digital way?
So we try to use as many opportunities as available. The mailing gets to be very expensive, even with a bulk mail permit for towns. And the timing doesn't always work out as we would like. So we try to hit all the major buttons, if you will. So we try to get virtual with Facebook and Twitter, either on official town accounts or who are the influencers within the community. We try to get it to go viral there. We also use traditional print media, most local weeklies or other things like that, to have an article. It could be written by the chairman, say, this is an important issue, we're undertaking the survey, we expect it to be in the next 4 to 6 weeks, it's gonna unfold, keep your eyes open. So people will generally start to find out about it. We put posters up at public buildings, library, just in doorways of things beforehand. Even on community access TV, a screensaver. So sometimes people who happen on community access TV see it
Yeah.
and know about it. We try to make the survey address very simple, so that, or it's hosted right on the town website, so that
Yeah.
you get to the front page, there it is, click, and you're right into the survey right away. So just little things that try to make it painless for people. And be honest and upfront with them and say, listen, we think the survey is going to take about 6 to 7 minutes of your time, and we hope, you'll tell us about your thoughts and ideas. And so,
Let me ask you something, because I'm equating this to the people that show up at meetings. And one thing that impressed me with the time I devoted to listening to the Woodbridge zoning meetings was the diversity of the responses. I'm used to, where are all the people that support you know what I mean? And the only time I get that is if I have a Panera Bread somewhere where everybody wants a Panera Bread and they all show up, or everyone wants a supermarket and they all show up. Most of the time, the people that support it stay home. In the towns that have had 8-30Gs, a lot of them, like Fairfield, do you see that as a situation where you're going to be able to entice more responses? And do you think that because we had the application go through, because it was in the media, in the local media a lot, that's going to help us be able to get responses if we go out in the, what are they called? There's the Woodbridge News. There's like 3, isn't there 2 or 3 weekly or monthly things they call?
There's the newsletter that's coming out in September, which you have a deadline in next week for.
Right.
Newsletter and then the one town newspaper, but
Right.
that's not run by the town, it just
Right.
services the town.
Right, exactly. I mean, we have a couple of opportunities, but do you see that as something that,
I always try to. I mean, because I just think that my wife used to work in marketing, and the mantra that she always said is sometimes people have to see things 7 times before it sinks in. So the more times that people say, oh yeah, I heard about the survey, or somebody mentions it to them, or, other ways to do it. So I think if you can let people know that, yes, there's a lot been going on in Woodbridge about housing, the state, there's been a lot going on in the state about housing. We have a task force that's working on this issue. Your input is going to help us do a better job. People care about your community. They'll want to participate, provided they're aware of it and given an opportunity. So how you do that, many years ago, we did have situations where we did mail out surveys, or the newspaper published it, and so people would fill it out and they could send it back in or whatever, and it had to be tabulated by hand, et cetera. Doesn't necessarily increase your participation rate. People have to be inclined. You got to motivate them. They're going to help their town. They're going to protect their town. I mean, you get responses which are configured that way. But you learn something, I think, from every survey that you do. In one community, very little support for increasing the number of affordable housing developments. But the nature of the responses actually gave us insight on what they're really concerned about, and now how the work of the committee needs to change to address that issue. And that's a good example of why every community is just a little bit different in what you need to do.
What kind of return Bethany got for their survey? Or how, one appeared in my mailbox. I live in Woodbridge. I don't know if they put it in everybody's.
I didn't get one, but I heard there were a few Woodbridge people who got them.
It
Yeah,
depends on,
but-
depending on how you access your street, the post offices can sometimes.
Oh, okay, but
Do you live on
does
the
anybody?
line? Do you live on the
I'm
Bethany
pretty
line?
close to Bethany.
Could have
Yeah.
been the mail route, yeah.
But does anybody know what kind of return they got on their survey?
I
Just
don't know, but
curious.
I can find out very
Oh,
easily.
okay.
But I
Just
thought,
curious.
I think I agree with you that paper was just very cumbersome to think, oh, I gotta drive it to town hall, or I gotta find a big envelope, and it's gonna need 2 stamps, and no
Yeah.
one has stamps anymore. And it was like a hurdle.
Yes.
So,
I thought so,
did a
too.
survey some years ago in Darien, and we actually went to you don't have a train station, went to the train station in the morning. People had an hour ride into the city. We gave them fluorescent green slips of paper that would not fit neatly in a pocket. So people are, and on the train, boom, we could see the results coming in. Because nowadays with smartphones, right? You can do it on your smartphone while you're having a cup of coffee at Starbucks or Panera or something else. So if you can actually get it on the doorway at a restaurant or another place, people are waiting for their coffee or something, and so again, I think the surveys are useful to understand community thoughts or feelings. Sometimes the issues that you could be grappling with on the survey have to do with zoning, I don't want to call it minutia, but kind of zoning policies or programs that might be, people aren't familiar with. And so you're not necessarily going to get great feedback on that, because we had a situation that in a survey that we had done that we used the word provide. Should the town provide for more options for housing for younger people? And we got pushback on the word provide. Did that mean the town was going to build this and give it to? No, that wasn't what it was about. But the verbiage was, it's important, all right? And so,
how much housing should be available? I suppose.
where were you when I needed you? So these are the kind of little things you kind of learn along the way. But even still, the survey results start to paint the landscape in terms of the environment that we are in. But I also think that the strategies or issues are things that we may not get good feedback on. How do you ask people a question about 830G when you have to probably spend a paragraph or more explaining 830G?
So
So how do you word that question? And I think the way we worded it in the Westbrook survey was to avoid state override of local zoning. And people understood that, and we got responses, so.
I mean, I'm gonna be honest, and you, this has been enlightening for me, because when I read through this, and, you know, okay, I mean, I'm looking at some of these questions, and, you know, I suppose they're providing information. You're asking people for, how much supply do you feel exists in your community for rental housing in the following monthly price ranges? I mean, I can just see them going. Yeah, right, I mean, I have.
How the hell do I know?
I have no idea, you know, but what I'm hearing, and we need to all speak up on this. What I'm hearing is, while we may take some stuff, and this is my opinion, while we may take some stuff from this, we need to tailor our survey.
My understanding is because this is a regional survey, that I don't think this is gonna change too much. I mean, I think the
Right.
strategy is I really feel it needs to be bifurcated. I really do think we need a local approach, you know?
Right.
Because this regional survey, they're doing it for regional planning, and it's really hard to get, you know, trying to get local, regional in one survey. I think it's difficult.
Is anybody here tech savvy in terms of Excel and pivot tables and things like that, or even with Excel?
Don't look at me.
See, you made the mistake of giving a slight nod, and that's all I needed. No, so the issue is, so recently had a situation where somebody was familiar with what are called pivot tables in Excel, and a pivot table allows you to take a large database of several hundred responses and query the data to come back and look at gender or age group or other stuff and say, isn't that interesting? Look at that. You would think that older people might be more concerned about their future housing choice or housing for their parents, and it turned out to be exactly the opposite. It turned out to be younger people who were more supportive of that. And you say, well, why is that? So you can find ways to mine the data to gain knowledge, but don't obsess over it, because it's not necessarily going to result in a policy.
Or a similar platform, a lot of that work is done for us.
Crosstabs, unless you buy the enterprise level SurveyMonkey, crosstabs don't come with it. So what I do is I cheat a little bit. I export it to Excel. I don't know if you're familiar with what are called tables. Normally Excel is a spreadsheet where the, you know, cell A times cell B equals cell C. No, you convert it in what's called a table, which makes it a database, and then you can sort and take out, focus just on responses from males or responses from females or age groups. Mm-hmm. And you can start getting simple statistics just by sorting the columns and looking at those responses. So I'm a bit of a techno dweeb. I like to figure this stuff out in the background. So I tend to do it so that I understand better, but I wouldn't necessarily suggest you guys get too focused in on how all the different ways you can analyze the results. I think get good questions, get as much penetration as you can in the community from different elements of the community, and see what the responses come back with and what it's telling you in terms of what you could do.
I mean, what I was referring to is, if there's a couple of questions here that we like, you know what I mean, that we think, I don't know if there are any, regardless, we plagiarize those and then do our own. I mean, I don't know what I'm raising is this. What is the benefit to our committee with our charge to go fully through
That we don't have to pay
the
for it.
region? Huh?
That we don't have to pay for it.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, I mean, other than that, because, you know, I'm honestly, and I'll be willing to sit down and talk with the first selectman or whatever. If we're gonna be worried about money, then we're not worried about affordable housing. in town, you
The
know?
other point that you have to look at, though, is this is your first go at this. This is not this is not the final thing.
Yeah.
This is gonna be a continuing thing. You need to start with something and get something on the ground, and there's no reason that you can't continue and tweak it. You're gonna have to tweak it every 5 years anyway.
Oh, no, I mean, the plan, but I guess that the focus I have is, my thing is, information is power. You know, I mean, you need as much information as possible. And the better the information, the better the result that comes out the other end. I look at it, and I'll throw it out, I look at it that we need, in order to develop a good plan, we need to have an idea. We're not gonna follow necessarily what everything the public says, but we need to know what the public input is. Because eventually, the plan has to be implemented by the Planning and Zoning Commission in the regulations, correct?
Yeah, I think there's other strategies. Planning and zoning plays a large role because enabling or requiring the provision of affordable housing would generally result from a zoning regulation. But there are other strategies that a town can do that don't necessarily fall within the purview of planning and zoning, so those are other things to be considered.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is if we're gonna get information, do we believe that this, if we stay with the SCROG survey, do we believe we're gonna get information beneficial to us? I guess that's my basic question.
Question, because I listened to the meeting today. Are we obligated to do their survey?
We are part of the regional planning process, so yes, I think we
And they
are.
don't want this survey tweaked very much. That was my understanding
They
from.
don't, but, you know, as David Fink said, you know, this doesn't preclude you from doing your own survey, so, you know, I feel like we either do a more local survey, because I don't think we're gonna be able to localize this, because there's questions that are just, you know, for Woodbridge that would not be germane for New Haven. So, you know, I'm thinking we need to maybe try to do a local survey in addition to the regional. Because I think, you know, having this plan with a, you know, it's like, you know, working, you have to think regionally but plan locally. I think that's important. I think it's important to get the regional data, because I think that's important. I don't want to diminish that effort, because I think it's a really important one. At the same time, I think there's some things that are unique to Woodbridge that we need to capitalize on.
To what extent do we think there may be some pushback, mental pushback from people if they see this regional survey, which clearly emphasizes regional issues and emphasizes things that we wouldn't put in a Woodbridge survey? Would they think, for example, I'm thinking of the comments that were made, public comments that were made during the application process, where people were saying, it should be Woodbridge driven, the ideas should be coming from Woodbridge, for Woodbridge, and I don't know to what extent that attitude may be pervasive or extensive, but to the degree that it is, I would fear that looking at a clearly regional survey that is clearly interested in issues that are outside of Woodbridge might backfire on us. I'm concerned about it anyway.
I think there's two things that you have to look at. There is a regional plan, and you are part of the region. And so it's important that Woodbridge's data gets into that regional plan. You can't avoid the fact that you're part of a region and you have to do that. Given that, part of what you do when you do your outreach to tell people about this survey is you couch it in terms so that people think that, or understand that it's not just a regional plan, that there is a town committee that is working on this, and that there may be a second survey that comes out which is more specific to the town, but we need you to participate in both. And if you can educate people that way and let them know, then they're not going to get turned off by the regional thing.
You could also take advantage of the timing. Let people know that there's going to be 3 opportunities to comment. There could be the regional survey, the discussion, which is facilitated by the region, David Fink, and then a town survey. And really, it's all part of a dialogue. We want to know what you, the community, think. So from each of those different data sources, you may get entirely different groups of the community to show or participate in each of that, okay. We're gonna try to bring it all together and try to make sense out of it.
So, timing frame wise, you know that the surveys, the regional survey is coming out in September. I talked to Eugene today at Council of Governments, and I asked him, I said, when should we start, looking to line up David? And he said specifically, not probably until the beginning of October. So if you did something in October with an outreach meeting with David, then if you did your own survey in November, then you're moving along, you're missing that dead spot that Glenn has talked about, where you have this interim where nothing's happening. And you then not only have the benefit of having a regional survey result, but you've also done some outreach through David to help educate people, but then you also have the ability to have your own survey, which then can give you some perhaps more specific information to hear, and you're getting that before January, so you're not sitting here waiting, because you do have a time frame. And that might be a way to do it.
Well, I mean, certainly if we're gonna do our own survey, and we're gonna send out 2 surveys, let me just ask this question, would it be survey, public outreach, or just as Chris said, survey, public outreach, our survey?
When David Fink is available or when our survey is available. I don't think we should hold off on our Woodbridge-based survey if we can't get a date with David Fink, or, you know what I mean? I think when it's ready to go.
Yeah, so David
What's
Fink
the
said,
ideal order? Is that what you're
Yeah,
asking?
yeah.
I mean, if you could control it, or what do you think would be the best way to present it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think regional, and then David Fink, and then outreach, and then another.
yeah, I think that would work.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, what does this David Fink meeting mean? Is this all are welcome in the firehouse or the high school gym or the senior
It's-
center gym or
He
something?
can meet with you and he can help you to do whatever it is that you want done. So it can be a larger thing. It can be something here where people can, Paul can tape it and people can watch it, however you
Yeah.
wanna do it.
Okay,
Sounds
But
like we
his
should.
job is to help you get outreach. That's, he can really help you with that.
I saw
David is excellent at running a public meeting.
I mean, I think we should have at some point a big all are welcome meeting, as long as obviously it's safe to do so, and I think we have to.
So
do
David
that.
was doing meetings similar to this some years ago. He had a PowerPoint at the beginning that sort of set the stage, if you will, and then he kind of ran it a little bit like a talk show in terms of giving people an opportunity to talk about their aspirations and their concerns and the issues that they faced. And David did a wonderful job of, making people feel that they were part of a dialogue. And I think that that's very useful. He has an excellent skill set in this particular area. So I think if you can start to get a sense of what David's approach is likely to be, I think it's similar to what I've just described. But now that might help you figure out the regional, the local in person, and then we can tie up some loose ends with our own survey. That might be the way to go. But I would urge you to kind of also think out the schedule. I don't know how often the committee meets, but the whole idea about making sure you've got enough time. I think there are 3 key parts to a planning process, all right? The first part is what I call the inventory phase, which is you have to collect information to set the table so that now you know what you're working with and dealing with. And I think the survey actually becomes part of that, right? Because you're learning about public opinion. For me, the next phase is what I call the assessment phase. And this is now where you're looking at the data, the information, and if there's cognitive dissonance, the data says one thing, the community thinks another, or situations, there's clearly a gap or there's clearly an opportunity or something like that. That's what happens in the assessment phase. You kind of figure out where things are or where they could or should be going. And then I think the third part is really the strategies and recommendations. So I think if you approach the process, and maybe even a schedule, and say, all right, look, we're gonna go through inventory through Thanksgiving, okay, or Christmas, whatever you're going to do. An assessment could be happening as you go along to figure out where the different elements lie, and then start to get to strategies. And then I try to get to strategies early in the process, so there's plenty of time to share it with others in the community, get their input and feedback. So when it comes to adoption, what I was looking at on the SCROG schedule, it seemed like there was a month left, and you needed 30 days for the notice period to meet the state deadline. I said, how's this gonna work? Are they gonna deliver a report that you're supposed to adopt? Branford said, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna try to get the strategies in January, and then we got 6 months to road test it.
And you're writing your own survey, right?
They've asked me to work with them on that, yeah.
And we have to realize that we don't know what's gonna happen with the Delta variant and what's gonna happen with emergency orders, you know, as we move into the fall. I mean, certainly I can see the deadline being pushed back if there's an issue in the fall. You know what I mean?
Not sure that they moved the date up on these affordable housing plans, so I'm not,
Understood, but there could be.
I wouldn't count on it. I mean,
I know, I
hope,
wouldn't count
hope
either,
for the
but
best, but prepare for the
If
worst.
there's something that happens in the fall, you know what I mean, that prevents, I mean, it is imperative. You can talk all you want about Zoom meetings and everything like that, but I think in Woodbridge, I know for us, for me, it's imperative that we have a public meeting, potentially run by, you know, David Fink. I mean, the advantage of David, especially, you know, and I've been through, we just went through one, David and I did a breakout room. It's great in the Zoom. It's not.
Yep.
It's not what it, you know, what it really can be. But the advantage of David is that of his knowledge of the statistics and the answers to those questions that often come up, housing issues.
Yep.
That's the advantage. Having him at a public forum, I think, where the people are out there, you know, and whether it's in Center School Gym or, you know, whatever, something like that would be a tremendous benefit to us as a committee to be able to get an input, you know, information from the public. And right, and then I think then after that, you know, sometimes based on that, we can tailor the survey and get to the next level with respect to it, because it's, you know, it's really important to get that input. Gathering other information, infrastructure, is kind of easy, Woodbridge, because we don't have a lot of stuff that other towns have. We have to play the, you know, the cards we're dealt. I think that's a good idea, and it would seem like, you know, yeah, we can send out the survey. Actually, by sending out this survey, it's a test of how we should send it out. I mean, you know, what kind of advertisements we get. Do we, you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm one of those people that reads both that newspaper and the newsletter, you know, the little newsletter. If we get a full page, you know, up front, you know, to tell the people, you know, we are the housing committee, we are going to be reaching out for you, you need to be part of our committee. You know what I mean? You know, and some phrase like, we need a committee of 9,000, you know what I mean? Be part of it. You know what I mean? You know, that type of thing, you know.
Group dynamics are hard in a group of seven.
You know,
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm not a marketing person, but
Yep.
something like that to get people to be involved.
Understood.
And at both.
Very simple.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right?
That's what it is. You don't
That's
want
all
to
it is.
scare them. You
Your
just
voice
want to
matters.
say, your voice matters.
So in the sense of timing, so you think in September for the regional and then David Finkel in October, and then something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems to be the way to go. Is there anybody else? I mean, you know, we can, I can reach out to David by email, you know, at any
It's
point.
just the deadlines for promotion, I think. The Woodbridge Town News, their deadline is,
Deadline next week, which I sent to all of
the
you.
deadline next week for the Woodbridge newsletter.
And then I think later in August is for the September Woodbridge Town News, and they're not always printed monthly. So,
So I think, you know, at this stage of the game, somebody needs to be active and get something in for next week, just generically saying, you know, look, there's a survey coming, you know, it's one of the first of a series of things that we'll be doing, you know, with our Housing Opportunity Study Committee, where we're really actively looking for your input. We want your voice to be heard, that kind of thing, and get that out there. It doesn't have to be huge, it just has to be out there. You've said you're on the Bethany Woodbridge thing, that's one place to talk it up there. And there's the Block Watch, whatever it's called, there's another place and whatnot. We can reach out to PTO, the churches can, you know, you've got enough churches and synagogues in town that you can ask them, can you just mention it, you know, put a little blurb in your bulletins or something, it's just a place, yeah, it's just a place to mention it.
When is the, I mean, we have to make sure we have to know, this is the regional survey.
Right.
There'll be more information. What is the timeline change now? It's gonna go out
It's
my
going out in
Wi-Fi's not
September.
working here, so.
September 1, do they?
We don't know
they
yet,
know?
but it's September, so
And
all we
we-
have to do is tell them
The
it's
town
coming.
newsletter is very timely. Tony does it, and it's always in your mailbox around the first of the
So it's
month.
going out in September with a response date of, it was what, 4 weeks was it this time?
3, I
Three.
think he said.
Huh?
I
He
think
said
it's
3.
3 weeks.
It was a
Yeah,
3
it was
weeks?
3. He said, you know, it was,
So, I
Two's
mean,
not
all you're
enough,
gonna
3,
do
4's
is
too many.
alert them to the fact that it's coming. So right now, it's
Right.
just a,
Yeah.
hey, heads up, look out for this. And then maybe on the, you know, on your other accounts, start saying, hey, you know, that survey's gonna be coming out this week, so that it's not just lost now that there's continual chatter about it that's out there. And we can make some posters and put them up at recycling and around town and however, you know, wherever you wanna put them. You see more places than I do. I know recycling in Bethany is the place to put stuff, but I don't know about Woodbridge.
It's a good point that Chris brought up. We've actually had great response on public meetings when we were having them, but also surveys by lawn signs. Now, I know we're headed into election season or whatever, but,
No, we were.
no, we're done with that for a
oh,
while.
are you really?
Yeah,
Awesome.
we do it in
So there's an opportunity there that just, you know, these simple lawn signs that say, Woodbridge Housing Survey, woodbridgect.org, right there on the front
We have
page.
those A-frames in town. I think they're pretty
These
noticeable.
were,
People pay attention.
so I get the styrofoam ones on the little wire things,
Mm-hmm.
and if they get foisted, you don't.
Sure.
But at the entrance ramp to the highway or the exit ramp, I mean, how many people go in and out of town on a regular basis? So they don't read the paper, they don't do the other stuff, but they're driving around. And it does have an impact. So think about ways to be creative.
Can I want to circle back to the order in which we do this stuff, and it isn't necessarily the order, but with respect to David Fink, how do we prime the potential attendees to explain to them why we're having this, why he's here, what kinds of things they should be asking, what they should be concerned about? How do we have that? Because if it just, if there's no preparation really for that, it's not going to work very well, I don't think. It just occurs to me we need to figure out a way to get people's interest, be it positive or negative or whatever. And I'm not sure how you go about doing that.
That was part of what I was saying about our charge. We need to have a way to explain who we are, why we're doing what we're doing, and that we're authorized by the town to do
Right.
this for the benefit of the town. There has to be some consistent blurb for us to use to explain what's going on. Right now, we're invisible. I haven't never seen any reference to this committee anywhere. So, I don't know how I guess we just have to start with writing our own.
Well, it's been in the emails that go out, and it's been in the, I don't know. the
In
difference
Beth's
between the
column.
two. In both of the newspaper.
Yeah, when we
and
were
the-
appointed.
And
we
the
started, yeah.
newsletter, it's been done, but you're correct. I believe that once I was just scribbling here what we send out. For instance, if we're gonna put something in next week, you know what I mean? We can, if we're focusing on something for next week, we need to say, the regional South Central first of all, don't use SCROG, because people won't know what SCROG is, you know what I mean? The South Central Regional Council of Governments Housing Survey will be coming out in September. You
I
know,
go with a better acronym.
let your voice be heard, make sure, you know, make sure you fill it out. The question that I have is this, okay, if I wanna put that in there, I don't want too much in there, but I wanna tell them how it's coming out. Coming out how? How are we sending it out to them? Is it gonna be in your mail? Is it gonna be on Facebook? Is it gonna be on everything? Because I think we have to tell them, look for it, blah, 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 blah. Please answer, you only have through, something like that, and try to put that in, get an entire page. As far as this, who we are, okay? I mean, we have an outreach committee, maybe the outreach committee can develop a simple 1-paragraph, 2-paragraph explanation that can be put out both in the newspapers and everything like that, explaining who we are on Facebook, and be on the front page of the town website, to explain who we, this is what we are, and give them a general idea what we're gonna be doing, which is another form of advertising. There will be this South Central Regional Council of Governments Survey, Regional Housing Survey in September. We are looking to have an outreach and, we are looking to do this. You need to be part of it, and that one can be a little more elaborate. You need to be part of it. This is a statutorily required, a group that is gonna, develop the strategies for the housing plan. It is required by next summer, let your voice be heard, and, make sure you participate. That kind of, I'm just thinking, I don't wanna step on the toes of the outreach committee, but I'm saying these are the kind of outreach things we can do before we do the public.
Well, no, Tom, I mean, we need to, I mean,
Have a page on the town website too, so you have that.
So what might be effective?
Let me explain something to you about the page on the town website. You have to search for it.
No, that's what I'm saying. Is
You
there
have to
anything-
search for it. We need to be on.
So just take a housing icon or logo right there on the front of the town's
Yeah.
website perhaps that will click you. I mean, Chris did an excellent job, I feel, in terms of the TPZ in managing the record on that. So there could be examples, links to other housing plans done by other towns. There could be links to the state legislation. There could be all sorts of stuff that would help people be aware of what you are doing. And that's journey.
So it may be, I'm sorry to
No, go
interrupt,
ahead,
but
no.
you don't wanna have people distracted by a lot of gobbledygook legalese speak, because that's gonna turn people off. The average person doesn't deal with it, doesn't wanna deal with it. So if we had something very simply on the front page, which we can ask to do, of the website or wherever, and as you say, use the icon, and then in that say, here's our webpage, go to our webpage, there's more information here. Then we've already started gathering all that information, and so, that stuff is already there. But the thing is, we have to do this now, because you're not gonna meet again until September. So you need to decide now who's gonna write what, who's gonna get it in where, and all that other good stuff. I mean, we can call over to the Regional Council of Governments, talk to Eugene and say, hey, what format's gonna be in? I'm sure it's gonna be an electronic format. It's not gonna be a mailing format.
They said they were printed too.
yeah,
You may have print copies available, but it's not gonna get mailed. You may have print copies that are available here for people to pick up,
Library.
or at the senior center for people who may not be savvy with a computer or something like that. But the point is that you just have to let them know right now that that's where it is. We do have the sandwich boards, which we have the printer, the plotter downstairs, we can print up surveys available today, from, turn it in between now and whatever, and we
Right.
put them at the normal corners that we put them at, where everybody stops and
And then
reads
change
them.
the poster for town meeting on such and such a
Right.
date, yeah. And then
And-
change them for the local survey.
And
Yeah,
I mean, but there are other little outlets that you have. You've got, school being in session, so you can ask the
can
thing.
you do that these days? Can you, give thing to the kids to bring home to mom and dad?
But they
or-
have an electronic newsletter, at least they do in Bethany.
Okay.
And we should be able to contact the
Can't
principal
send
and say,
stuff
well,
on through
would you let us just put
Yeah,
a
I
little
don't-
blurb
I
in
don't
Should be
there?
able to do
I
that.
think
I
the
don't think you-
PTO,
I don't know
the
if you
PTO
can.
would send a blurb, and also the PTO
Yeah.
Facebook group,
thought
I'm
maybe-
I
sure
mean,
is
somebody's
robust.
gotta be able to send it
Too
and
bad.
get it out to the
I mean,
schools.
we're aged out of that, but I think it's pretty active.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got some ways to reach different levels of people. So if you do stuff at the senior center, you do stuff through the school, you know, we can talk to the high school and see if they can ship something home too. I mean, there's no reason not to use whatever's out there. And if nothing else, when somebody says, I didn't know about it, you can say, well, you know, we tried it here, there, and everywhere. And we're sorry you didn't see it, but we tried.
Well, I mean,
Okay, so,
I have one more question for Glenn, and this is really related to your work on the P and Z commission. Because I felt that there was a lot of substantial, I feel, zoning amendments that came out of this, that I feel is gonna, you know, get us to where we need to go, you know, I mean, and it is a first step. Is there any way, based on the zoning amendments that are going to take place, to project a build-out from that?
Oh, sure.
I mean, because I think that would be
But I think,
helpful.
yeah, so, I think there's a build-out in the 2015 POCD. It's got little dots on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's software out there these days that will do, there's two types of build-outs. There's a numerical build-out where you take estimates of land areas and acres and apply assumptions and factors and come up with numbers. And that's generally good for most types of scenarios. The other one is really sort of a physical build-out in the sense that there is computer software out there used with GIS that will actually try to place lots or houses within a piece of land. And at Planometrics, I mean, we did that quite a bit, probably 10 or 15 years ago. We got really good at it. But it turned out not to be something that most communities wanted. So retaining and keeping that expertise really just didn't pan out for us. So you can do build-outs, you can do them numerically, and the software that we used at the time was called Community Viz, V-I-Z, and it was really good for that, and that's probably what Mylona McBroom, or now SLR, used also, looking at that drawing. So yes, it's possible.
I mean, don't you think that would be useful for
It-
development strategy?
if you're doing the build-out, and Glenn, if you're doing the build-out, you're doing it based on your current zone.
Yeah, or you're doing it based on different
Based on
assumptions,
the-
but I,
Right, if you make your assumptions, because what P and Z took was the first relatively small step.
Well,
And,
I think for Woodbridge it was
well,
a pretty good step.
yeah, I think as we get into it a little bit more, we can look at the areas that they addressed and whether or not, how buildable out they are. Woodbridge, other than in the A zone, you don't have many pieces of land. I mean, that's one of the things I'm handing out to you tonight. You can take a look down at the zones, you know, the other zones in the A zone. You can take a look down. I found there is obviously the most obvious piece of land, two pieces of land at the end of Bradley Road and Litchfield Turnpike, you know, which are abundantly developable. There are other areas of land, but if we develop those, we're not gonna have any local farmers markets, because they were farms, you know what I mean? So, you know, there's, you know, you can look at them and say that. So I think that's part of the gathering of knowledge, you know what I mean? But yes, we can certainly give ourselves that kind of information. I have found, and you refer to planometrics, you know what I mean? I have found in other towns, that information scares people. Because people are still obsessed with this. We're too dense, we have too many people, they don't understand we have a housing shortage. And the minute you give them the fact that your housing, your number of people was gonna go up, they make the ridiculous assumption that your school system is gonna become overburdened. So that is, I mean, and I'm being honest, that's my input from my experience. That I've had situations where people have stood up with this is what the build-out is, you know what we're gonna be like, you know what I mean? Do we wanna be that big anymore? And that's an issue that we have to confront going forward. Now, is it a good bit of information for us to have with this modern technology to say, okay, if we had, let's make these assumptions with this zone change, with the two-family with the multifamily requirements, what is the build-out, what is the number of units, realistically speaking, that can be constructed on this property? I mean, certainly we can go into it, but I'm,
If you simply look at it and you say, you have some very large houses in town, that at some point, somebody may sit there and say, I don't wanna have this house all by myself, I'm gonna split it into two. So, you've got 3,000 some odd houses in town. If you were very, very conservative and said, out of that, maybe 500, maybe 250 get turned into two-family houses. What have you just done?
yeah, no.
And it's not just taking a large tract of land and, I mean, that can be an alternative, like you said in Fairfield, where they had small things that happened. And so I think, that's part of what you have to look at too, is how do you do this in a way that doesn't make people afraid, yet does it in a reasonable way? Because I think there are many people who grew up in two-family homes. I did.
I think my advice overall is, given the amount of time you have between now and June 1 of next year, that could take some time. My thought might be that the committee can't actually change any regulations or do anything else. You're gonna be making recommendations to others. And it would seem to me that one of the things you could recommend would that a build-out analysis be done so that we can perhaps understand the implications. And the firm that did your POC day did something 6 years ago. So maybe there's something there that could be salvaged or whatever moving ahead. So if you waited to get that build-out done and worry about the assumptions and everything else, you might be losing valuable time, and you only have a certain amount of time between now and June 1 of next year. So you might want to try to find a way to kind of bridge that gap.
Focus on getting the information out. Do we wanna choose someone? Do we wanna talk about what we wanna get into the, what is it, Chris, for next week? Which one is that, the newsletter by next
It's
week?
the town one. It's the one that Tony Belinsky does.
Okay, the one that Tony does. What do we wanna do? Can we be offered a full page?
No.
No, I mean, I took a look at it the other day for a different reason, and she had almost all of it laid out. I mean, of course, there can be changes, but maybe we can get, a little box on the front with a border, but the whole document is only 4 pages, and you've got the back page is an ad and the mailing address, the front page is pretty much Beth's column, the inside has advertisements, something for the library, something for the senior center, so that's already recreation, right, so that the template is pretty full from month to month as it is.
Well, I mean.
But I know for
the
some
worst
of-
somebody can say is no, but when we ask Beth to give us half a column, she's got 2 columns, we'll take half a column. Or a quarter of a column right in the front, bordered and everything like that, right in the front, cut short what she's gonna say.
I'll reach out to Tony, I have to talk to her this week anyway.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to.
She's
I'm
actually
trying
on
to think of-
vacation.
She's on vacation.
She's on vacation, so she'll be back Monday, I think.
Right, but I'm
So
just
I'll
wondering-
reach out
so
to Tony
yeah.
about space.
Right, so so the next question then becomes, what do we put in it?
Depends on how much space you have.
Well, what do we wanna put in it? What's our desire to put in there?
Do you want to turn that
Over to the outreach committee?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll let them do, I mean, I wanna, what we're talking about here is focusing on.
I think at its most basic, it's look for the regional housing
Right,
survey,
yeah, I
please
mean,
participate.
Yeah, first of all, who we are, not who we are, the Woodbridge Upper, but our banner across the top, and say, and indicate that the South Central Regional Council of Governments, housing opportunity.
Don't get lost in all that. Just say there will be a regional
Regional
housing
survey.
Coming
survey
soon.
coming out. Please respond, have your voice heard.
In the month of September.
There you go. That's
In the month of
perfect.
September.
Lots of white space around the words.
All right, so maybe in
I'm going away
Beth's
with
column,
memory.
she can refer to us having our meetings and that things are underway, and then
Yeah.
maybe there's a way to do a little highlight box about regional survey coming soon, please participate.
Yeah, part of the
And,
problem
and
is
if you
I'd
can
like to say
put,
how it's-
you know, please see our webpage on the town website, just webpage on town website, you know, just something to say.
Okay, we'll see what kind of space there is. I'll
Well,
talk
let's
to her when
find,
she gets back.
let's try to find out how they're going to broadcast the survey online, if we can possibly get that information.
That, right now, you're just
We
letting
won't
them
have the
know that
link
the
ready
survey's
for-
You know,
coming.
she just said that we're, more information on our website. We don't
Yeah,
have
well,
more
that-
information to put on our website.
Well-
So I'm just saying, they probably have the information right now, how they're planning to roll
They
it
may,
out.
But
Right.
that doesn't have
But it
to
would
go
be
up
very good.
right this second.
No, I
because
didn't mean that.
this paper isn't coming out till the beginning of September, so we can get that on before then.
Yeah. All right, I'll
Good.
talk to Tony when she gets back from vacation next week.
When is that what, first week in September?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And, I guess the other question, and, I don't know anything about funding, is whether or not, we want to have, available with that similar type message, or maybe a little more flyers to pass out before, at any events or anything like that.
The other Tony.
I will say, I'll talk to Tony Belinsky about the town newspaper. I don't have my Wi-Fi here for some reason, but,
It's down.
oh, thank you. No wonder. The Woodbridge Town News deadline is a little bit later in the month, but that'll have more of an opportunity for a larger article story and possibly ability to do either a paid ad or submit a photo, which could get printed at no charge. So that's different than trying to squeeze in the town newsletter. That'll have much more opportunity for space.
And Pooh has also said she can run a banner on
Oh, yeah,
your
something that
TV.
goes
Yeah, we
through.
don't want to forget the Pooh is here. It's very important.
Thank you.
Make friends in high places.
There you go.
I just put the hot spots, what to think of a hot spot. maybe.
Oh, thank you. I think the deadline's the 23rd, maybe, for Woodbridge Town News. It's kind of their back to
Well,
school
why don't we let
issue.
the outreach committee handle that, so we don't get, imbued upon it here, trying to write things. The outreach committee can do that and try to get it in before, when it's supposed to get in. And then if the, newspaper or on the website, maybe what the outreach committee, and I'd be willing to tell about, maybe we need to draft what would amount to a news release, a press release, you know what I mean? That's gonna be on our webpage, or that's gonna be, linked to our webpage, or something that's gonna be on the front page of the website. So when people get directed to the website, they can get directed and easily click to go to our webpage. And we can have a little news release that sort of explains what we're doing and what's coming up in the future. And what are the things to look for, and let your voice be heard, or whatever, whatever phrase the outreach committee wants to put into it. And that way we can move forward, we can get out to the, we need to get the public, I don't wanna say fired up, that's the wrong word. We need to get the public
Engaged.
involved, engaged.
So your outreach, you put outreach.
I
I am too.
Who is this?
Okay.
That's Mary,
If
Glenn,
there's- I
Jim.
think we've hit
Nicole,
most of
and
the
Deb.
topics, and it's getting late. We can spend a couple of minutes on infrastructure. And Glenn can, thank you very much, Glenn.
Thank you.
And, I was left with the impression that I will have a conversation with the powers that be, that you were gonna be our consultant, so I will have conversations with. the
Mary Ann
powers.
had asked me at one time, and I think at the time my response to her had been, we had just finished, I believe, the OCA application, and I indicated I kind of needed a breather. And part of the challenge, I think, is that communities I've had long-standing relationships with are saying, Glenn, you're our guy for our housing plan. And so that conversation should probably occur sooner rather than later.
Conversation needs to be had, yes.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
I hope I've been of
Very
some help to you
informative.
tonight, and best wishes on your efforts. Thank
We'll do
you.
a photo op another one.
I'll have to come back.
You will.
Very briefly, because we're getting close to the 2-hour point. Again, these are draft forms. For those of you that didn't hear it, the utilities map has notations on it that are, some of them are not correct. They were done by an intern who was working on it. She was working very hard, and then she unfortunately took ill and had to leave. And she was doing an effort to try to show you in what zones where the multifamily was. But the reason I'm a picture worth 1,000 words person, so here's your Connecticut, you see where we have Connecticut Transit, we have very little in town, and you have, in addition to that, you have a 2-page, one is a blow-up, one is a thing, of the Connecticut Transit map. The first one is a overall map showing the 3 bus lines, one that approaches Woodbridge but doesn't really get into it, and the 2 that come into Woodbridge, very, one that takes you to New Haven, and one bus that goes all the way to Seymour.
A day,
Huh?
once or twice a day.
Once or twice a day. And then there's a blow-up. The second page is just a cropped version of that PDF to give you a general idea of how the fact of this is where, the commercial zones are and everything like that, and we have very 4. So at some point, obviously we need, in part of our recommendations, to see whether or not there can be more expansive public transportation, but, and just throw it out. Number 2, you see the green for the water line and the blue-green for the sewer, and you see the relatively limited area that we have. Also, in the copies, I want you to say, I have to say, I thought my copier would have done a better job. The dotted blue lines, inside the dotted blue lines, that's supposed to be a little grayer. That's the watershed. So that's the area that there may be some notations explaining that, but that's the watershed area. And for instance, you see that from that area on down towards the New Haven and towards the Hamden line, there's no watershed in that area. There are parcels of land, and I'm going to turn it over to Buddy shortly about some of the what our stock is and everything like that. But that comes down into the commercial area, and then what I did is, just for your edification, you could all go on the Town of Woodbridge GIS website. But I was able to, you can print out a map, and I just wanted you to see it. This is listed as the 2019 color air photo. And what's interesting, what I meant before, if you look right in the middle of one of the commercial zones, you have these open pieces of land, but they're farmland. You could actually see the plowed fields. So, and there were other parcels of land, even not in the watershed, that I discovered, let's say, north of Center Road, that they were, again, 2 of them were just giant estate, with giant houses on them, you know what I mean, and large pieces. And the others were, there was a couple that were part of the, I'm drawing a blank on the farm stand up north of Center Road.
Oh, Mary Mountain?
Yeah, Mary Mountain Farm. So, this is just the type of information we need to show the limitations that we do have with respect to the zoning. So it's very generic, it's very preliminary. We're hoping to, be able to provide you information of where, if we're talking about alternative and affordable housing, where can it go, and what do we have? And with that, I will turn it over to Buddy, who did an inventory of the 2 to 4 family residential.
So with the help of the town assessor, we were able to identify the inventory of 2 to 4 family dwellings in town, not including any accessory apartments that a single family might home. These are designated 2 family dwellings, 2 and 3 family dwellings, and there's 1 4-family dwelling. And so there's a total of 68 dwellings in town. which consist of a total of 139 units. So we've got a breakdown of the bedrooms, bath, the number of units for each. And I'm going to be elaborating on this and trying to identify the rents for some of these dwellings, you know, through MLS information, that type of thing, so that we can have some type of inventory of, you know, what might be available for another type of affordable housing options in town, you know, that's definitely not deed restricted.
Yeah, any questions for?
Can we get the information about about accessory
We can, yeah,
housing units too?
Yep. Plan on doing that as well, so.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
And right now, Chris, legal accessory apartments have to be attached, correct?
Correct. And Town Planning and Zoning is going to public hearing on the 23rd of August with increasing that size to jive with this statute that takes effect on October 1st. And then they're also expanding housing opportunities in what we call the GBA district, which is general business, but it's a portion of the general business district where they allow housing currently under the zoning regulations, but they would expand the types of housing that they would allow in there. So that public hearing will be on the 23rd. So if anybody wants to come talk, you're more than welcome to, and whatnot. And the only other thing I had to mention was everything is a watershed. It's just a matter of whether or not it's a public water supply watershed or it's not a public water supply watershed, because everything feeds into something somewhere. And what this map is showing you is public water supply watershed in the middle, where it feeds into a reservoir, an aquifer, or something that's used for a public drinking water supply, versus a normal watershed, which is feeding into something else. So like to the north along Seymour Road, it's feeding into Bladen's Brook, which is feeding down into the Naugatuck, which meets the Housatonic, which goes into Long Island Sound.
I'm so confused by that. So when I look at the map and I see Elderslie versus
So,
Nettleton, and how are they different? Because everybody
This
has
is a
well
public
water.
water supply watershed, right through the middle. And so this part of the system is feeding into the reservoirs that are here. What's feeding this way is this side is feeding into the Peat Swamp Reservoir, which is over in Seymour. And then this portion down here feeds into the reservoir system that's along Route 34 that you see just before you get to the Merritt Parkway if you're heading out towards Derby and whatnot.
Every area has a watershed, every
It's ju-
piece of land. So when I do zoning and the engineer has to design it, the public watershed is what is limiting in the zoning regulations,
Right.
not the regular watersheds.
Right.
Okay, so they're not limited, but when an engineer develops a plan, he's gotta show all the watersheds, cause he's gotta give a drainage plan. And so he's gotta show where all the watersheds are, and he's gotta balance it, I don't wanna he's gotta
Yeah.
balance everything. The public watershed is the thing in the middle, that's where you have the greater restrictions. And again, be careful when you're reading the notes, because she got a little confused with watershed versus,
Water.
when she was
I
writing
see
stuff down, but
Yeah.
if it's a public watershed, then that's where the limitation is, and some of it requires then to be a special exception, or some of it's prohibited, because it's in a public watershed.
And that determines the opportunity to build. It has nothing to do with the well water, because everyone has well water regardless of where they are on this map.
Watersheds have nothing to do with, you know,
Your
the
water
point of fact
source.
is- The point of fact is, if you're in a public watershed, and I'm not sure, Chris, you can correct me, there may be other-
Topographically, it's feeding in Woodbridge, it's feeding into some system that feeds into a reservoir.
Gotcha.
So in terms of our zoning, if you're creating new lots there, now you have to have a minimum of 2 acres of buildable land to create new lots in there. And this is where, under the new regulations that they adopted, when you look at this, that a 2-family house is by site plan, where it's not on a public water supply watershed, but by special exception, which requires a public hearing, where it is on a public water supply
Gotcha.
watershed, because they're trying to balance that. We're protecting the watershed and our water quality, which is also part of our charge.
Right.
So, that's what you're looking at in there.
I think if you amend the accessory housing unit
regulations to conform to what I understood was in the state regulation that you
That's what I
can,
just said, they're on
that you
hearing
can,
with it.
in the respect that you can have a unit that's detached from the main house?
They aren't including that language in here, but by default, when a statute takes effect, it overrides anything that's local.
Unless you, unless you object. Unless we were to, because there's
Unless we were to
the,
file something,
Yeah,
that's
exactly,
not
and
gonna
we're not.
happen. But a
Right.
statute overrides a local zoning
Right.
regulation,
Right.
even if you don't change the local zoning regulation.
Yeah, the other thing that, I don't know, and Chris can say, the other thing that's happening in town, that multifamily, is they put a regulation in that said the R5 zone, 5,000 square feet, you build one family or two family. The next line down says, however, you have to have 5,000 square feet per dwelling. They really make it 10,000 square feet for two family. I'm in the process in two towns to eliminate those regulations, which will now make 100-year-old homes that were made non-conforming, conforming. I don't think Woodbridge has that.
Woodbridge has nothing like
Yeah,
that.
Woodbridge says-
We have a max on building coverage, which is 15%, and that's between accessory structures and the primary structure. But we don't have anything about how big the house has to be per unit that you build. There is a minimum size to a house, but it's nothing crazy, in terms of, you've gotta have 5,000 square feet of house to build a house in Woodbridge. It's much slower, it's like 1,200, it's a fairly modest house.
The accessory apartment, what is it right now? Is it
The max right now is 600 square feet.
I mean, if you walk around older neighborhoods in Woodbridge, as I have done, or bike around them, you will see a lot of what appear to be apartments on top of garages. A lot of the houses were built that way. These are older houses. They were built with great rooms that were turned into apartments and everything like that. There's also one near me, there's one near me that has an apartment, clearly an apartment on top of a garage that's detached. The house doesn't have a garage, the house does not have an attached garage, but there's a garage in the back. So there's plenty of opportunities, potentially, once they eliminate the attached requirement for people to have accessory apartments, whether it's for family or not. That's been the biggest issue. You have all these requirements that say it's only for family, and you've got to register, and you've got to do that.
Well, that's not only because of having a tenant in your yard, but also there's some communities that are against Airbnbs and all of that kind of stuff too. That's a whole other thing, but that comes along with these
But that's a
accessory
different
dwellings.
use within the zoning table.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are different building code requirements for that. So,
Well, this was very productive. I think that
so
we
I
really.
have one question for you. What am I getting back to the Council of Governments in terms of the survey? We're just gonna run with their survey and you're gonna come up with your own. So at this point, we're not,
have some suggestions for them.
they have to get in tomorrow.
We could give them to you right now. I'm inclined to actually communicate some of these, because after listening to some of the remarks that were given into the kickoff meeting, I think they're going to be hearing them from other people too. So I think that we need to say what we think, with the understanding that perhaps nothing will be
And I'm
incorporated.
leaving tomorrow on vacation, so if you've got stuff, I need to get it now so that I can go downstairs and send it over.
Well,
I'm not in tomorrow.
fine. I hope you have a wonderful vacation, by the way, in case I
I
forget to
hope
say
so
that.
too.
So I don't know what you want to do. Do you want to go over this report and sort of decide what we want to circle and have her send along, or what do you want to do? This report, yeah.
Well, let's.
So I wrote this report up because I thought, not only did we want to report our work and our thoughts, but also I thought, even if we weren't going to, if we were not going to have a change made to the regional one, we should know what issues we reacted to and what we felt was missing, so that we could put it in our own, or manage it in some other way. So that's what this is all about. Do you want to just read it? Or do you want me to go over it with you, or what?
I'm looking at, I mean, this is, some of this was impacted by what we went through and what our schedule is, right? 'Cause we're gonna do our
Well, some of it will sound pretty familiar because of the conversation we just had.
Right.
For example, the emphasis on the need to expose potential strategies and get feedback on that subject, and, you know, I can tell where they're going with some of their questions, and it's really not necessarily where we want to go. Because the kind of report that we can expect for them is going to be very, very, very interesting, but it's not actually going to help us a great deal. If you want to look at the public, if you haven't seen enough Zoom calls, if you want to look at their public presentations for Groton, you can get an idea of what they're going to do with what they're planning to do. And it's very interesting, but it's not actually going to address our needs. As I said, I think that as I said in that kickoff meeting, there are maybe, I think he listed 8 towns in the region that are dramatically different in their housing from the other towns. So trying to mix everybody together is going to be very difficult. And I feel strongly that Woodbridge stands alone in the fact that our town has been talking about this issue for such a long time. People are sensitized to it, they're informed in certain ways about it. In that sense, we're way ahead of the others. And the COG doesn't have any way, of course, of adjusting for that. But we can.
Well, let me throw it out and start the discussion, looking through it and reading through it. We're making suggestions, we're making comments. I do believe, having attended that meeting, I'm sure, it sounded to me like they were appreciative of the comments, because they certainly were appreciative of the comments on timing, when everybody started talking to them about timing, and they recognized, oh, maybe we made a mistake on that, and they pushed it out, okay? Given that there may be still some changes, what is the issue, what is the problem if we forward this to them as a summary of our analysis, and they can take what they need, you know what I mean? They can reject what they don't need.
Or ignore it, yeah.
Yeah, but it also has some useful points in it. I do think that some of the points with respect to demographic information is very important, you know what I mean? And stuff
Yeah,
like
the
that
gender,
nature
we were
that
just
we
talking
brought
about
up.
getting gender.
Let's throw it out to them, and I think
Okay.
we have the freedom to do that, because if they reject it and send it out the way they do, you know, without it, we're gonna be doing our own now. So we have a little more of a freedom, you know what I mean? That we'll be able to fill the holes.
And to tailor our own
and
questions.
tailor our own
Right.
at the other time, but this may get us some changes to it that could benefit us.
Yes, yes.
Or they may get us at least some information about
Right.
why they insist upon doing what they're doing in the face of the
Right.
fact that
I don't
everybody
think
was
they're gonna give you
complaining.
feedback to this right now. They may just adjust their survey, but they're not gonna give you feedback to this.
Right.
They're just looking for suggestions, which apparently they've gotten from a few other towns. So if you can email this to me when you get home, then I will forward it to Eugene and say, here are the comments from our survey subcommittee on your survey.
I would
And
forward,
just-
I agree, I would forward it as is and let them review it.
Let them review it, right?
Because we can't force their hand to make the changes,
No.
but we can.
No.
And
Well, I think it's pretty complete,
if-
and it's
if there's any issue
self-explanatory.
with getting in and Chris going on vacation tomorrow, if you could give me,
if she just sends it to me when she
Yeah.
gets home, I will
Okay.
just forward it right now.
okay, fine, all right, then I'll.
It's not an issue.
Yeah, as long as I have, you know, that's okay.
I could accept that I had to reformat it just a little bit, and,
Then I can
And
scan it
before I
and I
left
can
it.
send it this way. I'll go downstairs and scan it and send it to him.
okay,
So
that will work.
Okay.
But I can just do it again, Chris, I'm happy. to do
I
it.
can go downstairs and scan it and send it off to him and
Yeah,
it'll be
she'll
done.
be done before you drive home.
Well, that's even better, I like that idea.
I think we've already done the tentative schedule and format for the initial, but we've already talked about that, and that was part of our conversation. Approval of the minutes. People got copies of the minutes of the June and
Do you want to just carry that over to your next meeting?
We'll carry it over to the next meeting.
Yeah, carry that over.
Anything else?
So your next meeting will be the first Wednesday in September, and I'll keep you posted on whether or not, given the Delta variant and everything else, we're still doing this. You know, as much as we can, we'll keep it this way for you. And then,
And outreach is going
Kath,
to.
you're gonna try to get a hold of David and see if we can line up a date,
I
maybe
did-
for,
I did talk to David, and he's willing to come. The problem he has is that he teaches a class
Mhm.
on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so he can't make Wednesdays.
David,
think.
oh, come and talk to just us.
Yeah. Or anything. He can't do Tuesdays or Wednesdays because he teaches at Central Connecticut.
Okay.
So if you're looking at, he said he'd come as
Well,
many
I mean-
times as
So
Yeah, but
if
I
he
think we're
came
talking
to a,
about him trying to do something in public forum in October.
Talk to him to plan the public forum, I mean,
Oh,
how many
absolutely.
meetings, right?
so you need to
So
meet
should
with
he,
him.
yeah.
So maybe in October, so at your September meeting, come prepared with your calendars for that week, first week in October or the first 2 weeks, and see when you're free. And then we can work around David's schedule, and instead of having your meeting on the first Wednesday, we can try to deal with doing a meeting when he can come.
But in the meantime,
But-
maybe he can pencil in a date or two to hold it for us.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about having a completely blank September, nothing happening in
I mean, he can
September.
come September. I mean, if you wanted to schedule something, a special meeting for him to come in and talk, he's very willing and
I thought he was gonna do like an all-town meeting though, not with our small
He
group.
can do
he can do
two.
anything.
He can meet with you first,
Yeah.
and then come back and do a town meeting. So you
Gotcha.
can get, same thing like you had with Glenn. You can pick his brain, you can have an idea of
Okay.
where you're going, that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I would love to have more than one town meeting, getting ahead of myself here, but a lot of towns have two.
We may
The first-
have more than one town meeting. One would be with David. We may have to have more. But the other thing we may have to consider is we have the right to call a special meeting of the committee. You know what I
Right.
mean? And we could have a special meeting of the committee on another night. All that's required is 24 hours posting the agenda. And if we need to have a special meeting of the committee to have David explain to us.
We could do that.
Second of all,
Right.
if there's any inconvenience or anything like that, if he does have an opportunity, and I'll even talk to him, we can also have at a committee meeting, we can Zoom him in.
Yeah,
You know what I
maybe
mean?
meet with him, small group in September, and then plan a town meeting in mid-October or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, if
One
he's
thing
available
you have to
twice,
be
yeah.
aware of in September is there's a lot of holidays that occur that other committees,
Right.
land use boards and whatnot are
Oh,
dancing
true.
around.
The Jewish
because of
holidays,
that.
everything's
So
all in
like
September.
planning and zoning
Yeah.
normally would meet the first Tuesday of the month. They're not meeting on Tuesday because of Rosh Hashanah, I think it is. So they're scheduled for the second week, but when they've scheduled their meeting is when there's an FOI meeting for all the land use boards and whatnot. So
Yeah.
there's a lot going on in there.
It's a
So,
busy month.
so maybe you all got your emails and whatnot, so maybe you can get to Kathy with what dates you're available at the beginning of September, and she can talk to David and try to set up a date for you, and then that way you'll get that rolling, because then that way, if you wanna have a town meeting, then you're that far ahead of the game. And I hate to push you guys, but I'm just so conscious of this time frame that you've got that.
No, you're right.
Yeah, you're hearing it from
No,
us
it's
too,
good.
Chris.
Yeah, we don't wanna, I mean, if we're gonna set up a time with David, I'm looking at it as, I don't think we can take one of our regular meetings and devote it to David. We have enough to do on our agenda. I
Right.
think if we're gonna have a meeting with David to discuss it,
Should
which
be a
is a good
special
idea,
meeting.
it's gonna have to be a special meeting
That's fine.
at a different time, because I think we need to focus on
That's fine.
getting more information up, seeing what happens with the survey, talking about when we're gonna have dates, how we're gonna get word out, stuff like that. David can help us setting up he's very good at organizing how he thinks the best way is to do a public meeting, okay?
Yep.
And I think it's good to have him in here, it will be very informative, but I don't think we wanna take one of our regular meetings and take up all the time with that, because we need to get some things done.
So you wanna keep your regular meeting for the first Wednesday, and now you're gonna have another meeting.
Yeah,
date.
whether it's in whether it's in September or whether it's in early October, we'll see, you know what I mean, how it falls.
We'll do one with David as a Zoom meeting, maybe that's be more,
If it's more convenient, I mean, Kathy can call David, I can call David, I mean, like I said, we, and we can, I've gotta be conscious of FOI and stuff like that, but, I've done meetings where instead of somebody sitting where Glenn was sitting, it's a monitor with the person, talking and via Zoom. I'm doing it next week, where someone's in Florida and they're participating in a meeting via Zoom on my laptop, on my iPad. So, I mean, we have to make do what we need to make do, and,
just an option.
yeah, make sure.
Our
Right.
next meeting is September 1st,
Is it the first?
be there Wednesday. It's the first Wednesday of the month.
First Wednesday of the month, yeah.
Is the first?
It's
right?
September 1st.
Right, it's before Labor Day, our meeting is before.
Yes.
Labor Day.
So maybe
Before
he's
Labor Day.
available mid-September, after the holidays.
Well, the other thing is, I didn't even think of that, if we're doing it on September first, maybe he's available, you mean after the Labor Day, right after the Labor Day holiday?
No, after the Jewish holidays, so I don't know the dates
When's
off
the
the top.
Jewish holiday, is it the?
Rosh
Seventh.
Hashanah is
7th.
It's the
7th
seventh and the
to
eighth, the first 2 days is Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh
Some people
Hashanah.
And then Yom
Well,
Kippur
some
a
people
week later.
celebrate it
Yeah.
2 days, some people don't.
Yeah.
I do.
Right.
Yeah, it
Because
starts
Wetlands is on the
evening.
22nd.
Okay, Yom Kippur is the 16th.
Oh, there it is.
And we also have to be mindful of having a room, so.
Yeah, good point.
Good grief, I see what you
What are the
mean.
availability what are the availability of the rooms over in,
Depends on how many people you're gonna have. So normally over there, you either use room 16 or you use downstairs in the senior center. And then there's one other room, which is 13, I think.
what was, there was a room when we did the, wetlands for the
That's 16.
farming, that was upstairs, that was up, yeah.
That was 16.
Okay, all right. I mean, just a room, I'm just thinking of alternatives, because Chris is right, once you start jockeying for holidays, you get into a problem with other boards and commissions, and, All right, we'll work on it, we'll see each other on the first.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Hi.